Hey, welcome to another Mixed Media Monday. I'm Eric Scott, and I'm here to make another small piece of mixed media artwork. For today, I kind of was looking through my materials, and I kind of have a little bit of a plan, a little bit of an idea. So sometimes I sit down and I just have no idea what I'm going to do, and I kind of work very spontaneously, very intuitively. And then other times I kind of look through what I have, and today I kind of dug through a whole bunch of fodder that I had and pulled out a couple of things that I might want to work with. And we'll see. I mean, it might work, it might not work. So I kind of have a little bit of a vision in my head, but I'm always leaving room for things to not go exactly according to plan. So anyway, let's go ahead and switch it over and get started. So I've got my little piece of mixed media paper. This is that Strathmore 400 series paper. It's pretty thick. It does buckle a little bit, but it doesn't wrinkle or the paints don't bleed through. I've got my Derwent Inktense paints, and I really don't know exactly like what colors I'm going to use and different things like that. I think I'm going to go ahead. I'm kind of feeling my one of my favorite color schemes, and that's the yellows and browns and reds maybe. So we'll just start off with some yellow, just kind of spread that around, get kind of a nice wash. Maybe I'll go ahead and paint the whole surface. Just get that all kind of covered. Now, like, it's maybe hard to see, but there's some variation in the values. Let's go ahead and hit that with the hair dryer. Okay. I think what I'll do next is I'm going to use some of this yellow oxide, this yellow ochre, whatever it's called. I'm just going to let the paintbrush dance around, get a little bit of texture on it. I think I'll try to darken the edges a little bit. And while that's still wet, I'm going to reach over here and get some of this red oxide. So it's kind of a rusty color. All right, let's go ahead and dry that. So I'm just using the same brush. This is a number 10 round brush. The numbers really don't matter because each brand kind of has its own sizing and the numbers. So a number 10 of one brand might not be the same size as a number 10 in another brand. That's one of the confusing things whenever you're buying brushes. But these have nice stiff bristles, so I can do a little bit of splattering. And I like using synthetic bristles, especially because they tend to be a little bit more, a little stiffer. That way you can do stuff like the splattering. Okay. So I'm just kind of letting that sit for a moment. I'm going to take a little spatula scraper that I have, just kind of drag it. It looks like most of the splatters have kind of dried up. All right, let's go ahead and hit that with the hair dryer. All right. I think what I want to do now is I'm going to pull out my Inktense pencils. Let's see, mustard. No, that's a little bit too yellow. All right, baked earth. Let's go ahead and sharpen it. All right, so one of the things I want to think about today is kind of composition, kind of layout. I don't know if I've really talked too much about that in this series, but it's one of those things from being an art educator and art teacher for so many years, teaching students how to create things that are visually interesting. So one of the ways we do that is to think about layout. And so I'm using some of these rectangles or squares actually to create some areas, some shapes, some spaces to break up this big space. So I put this here for a reason. So if I divide this this square up into thirds vertically, so if I imagine that there's a line here and a line here, you can see how that here kind of divides that square like in half. And then if I do the same thing this way, you know, this square is kind of where the two lines intersect. We call that the rule of thirds. And that's something that I learned more than 30 years ago. It's probably going on 35 years ago now that I learned that. And I learned it in a high school photography class. And so the rule of thirds really just says that we place our focal point at one of those intersections. So if we have two lines this way and two lines this way, we have 4 spots that really makes it interesting. And it's because we don't put it smack dab in the middle. So a lot of times when the subject is smack dab in the middle, we really kind of, you know, it's really predictable. And it's not as interesting if we put it off to the side. So I have this big square. Now I'm going to balance it off with some smaller squares over here. Now I'm repeating the square shape. So that brings a lot of unity, brings a lot of repetition. So lots of squares. So I have a lot of, like I said, repetition. Now too much repetition can be a little bit boring. So we're going to have to break that up a little bit. All right, so just using a different paintbrush to spread the water-soluble pencil around. And I tend to build up the values. So I kind of start off with the lighter colors first. And so now this is more of a kind of a light medium value. But it's a little bit darker, so it creates some contrast. And that's another way to kind of create emphasis. And then also size. So this square over here is a little bit bigger. So as we look at this, our eye is going to be drawn to this bigger square. You know, it's a little bit bigger. It's the same value, but and also the placement, it's over here by itself. So really kind of that's our focal point right now, but I think that's going to change. Let's go ahead and hit that with the hair dryer. All right, so I want to bring in, I'm kind of working with a lot of things that I typically work with, whether it's the colors, you know, of course, it's the materials. I kind of use the same materials over and over again. And then I love using maps. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use some straight strips. You know, I've done this a lot. I love using collage to create basically thick lines. So the strip starts to read as a line. Let's go ahead and grab, gotta find my glue paper. I've forgotten to grab that earlier. All right. So I've left it a little bit longer than I need. And smear some glue on the back. Okay, so I'm putting this strip on this side, kind of helps balance it out. So this is a big square, helps balances out, but now things kind of are feeling like, oh, it's real heavy over here because I have these 4 squares, I have this strip, so I need something else over here to start to help balancing it out. So going back, I'm going to use my map because I want to repeat. That's going to help me repeat that. Maybe what I'll do is do a couple little strips. See how that works. So what I like about collage is that, we can kind of cut things and lay them down, place them. So again, I'm kind of thinking about balance, that these 2 pieces start to balance that out. Now, the thing is, I'm using a lot of squares and rectangles. I mean, the strip is really a long, skinny rectangle, and I've got vertical and horizontal lines. So a lot of repetition. It's actually kind of getting kind of boring. If I keep doing just squares and rectangles, it's going to be kind of boring. So I want to start thinking about how I might break that up. All right, so I've got that going. I think that'll be it for the maps for now. Let's go ahead and trim that. Okay. So I've got a lot of squares, rectangles, rectilinear kind of shapes, all kind of vertical, horizontal. If I were to put them at a diagonal, that would be something different. So I'm going to take my red pen now, and I'm going to put in some lines. Now, I'm not going to do straight lines or vertical and horizontal lines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play off of the maps. And I've done this plenty of times, but I love the fact that these maps have red lines that represent, certain kind of roads. And I can sort of mimic the lines. And so this does a couple things. Number one, it ties in the collage to the background. And then it helps me add some contrasting lines and shapes. So now I've got these kind of uneven, irregular lines that kind of go in different directions. So this goes back to those mapping marks that I really enjoy and use a lot. And it comes, directly from the maps that are on here. And of course, I can always add in some that aren't there. Okay, so I've got some mapping marks going on. I'm thinking about it. Maybe I want to have a little bit more contrast, a little bit of a darker value before I do much else. So I'm going to dig in here. I'm going to find, here's a willow. That's a darker brown. Let me go ahead and sharpen that. All right. I want to kind of bring out these squares. So the red really pops out because it's a little bit darker. And of course, it's red. So that's going to draw attention. It stands out because it's really the only red things on the piece, but a little bit darker. You can see how just shading now with the brown with this willow makes that square pop out again. So let's go ahead and do the same thing here. So these colors and the maps kind of give me a desert feel, like we're traveling through the desert. But what's funny is to think about the map. The map I think is of Minnesota, and so there's all these roads, and Minnesota definitely is not the desert. If I would have thought about it and planned it out, I could have used a map from a state that has a lot of desert, and then you probably wouldn't see as many roads. That's all right. I mean, it doesn't have to be. We don't have to be like, oh yeah, it has to be a desert state or a desert map. I mean, it could be, but I mean, I didn't really plan that. So a lot of times the meaning starts to come about because of the choices that we're making. I mean, it didn't dawn on me whenever I was doing the yellows and the browns in the background that, oh, it looks kind of like deserty. So I mean, that could be something. Now I take that and use that in something different. Like, so I might say, okay, all right, I really like the browns and the tans and the yellows. I want to do it again, maybe do it in a bigger piece. And then you can purposely be like, all right, I'm going to choose a map that's, that has the desert in it, or that's from a desert place or a desert state. By doing the brown, I'm going further and pushing the collage into the piece. I find that that's one of the things that some artists struggle with, is that their collage looks like it's floating on top. So how do you get the pieces to feel like they're part of it? And by going over it, whether it's with the red lines or whether it's with a little bit of brown. Let's go ahead and dry this. Okay. So anyway, I've built up some really nice layers. I have an image I want to use. And I was looking through my stash, and I just picked this image of this lady, this model from a fashion magazine. And I want to use her. And but I'm not going to use the whole thing. And this is a small paper. So I don't want to just cut out a square or rectangle. I mean, she's kind of you know the face is a little bit large for this small paper. But what I'm thinking is that if I can cut out the background, and now I'm looking at her, and she's got some pretty simple outlines, like a simple silhouette. So I think I can just use my scissors. If it's too complicated, I could always use a craft knife, an X-Acto knife. But I think the scissors are going to be fine. Let's get rid of this. So once I get it started, it's pretty easy to cut and turn the image as I cut. I'm probably not going to use her whole, I'll probably end up cutting this part off because if I use it as it is now, she's right in the center. I mean, her face is smack dab in the center. So I'm going to move her over. Now, here's the thing. I wish I would have cut a little bit more off down here because I could have put her up here. Okay. And then her eyes, her face would be in that intersection of that rule of thirds. But now that I look at it, if she's directly across from that, that might seem a little weird. So maybe it's a good thing. If I put her down here, it's that rule of thirds is going to kind of crisscross here. Probably don't want to have her eyes, maybe her nose or her mouth. And then, I don't know, maybe I want to have her shoulders in there, at least a little bit. So, it's not a perfect rule of thirds, but her mouth is kind of that rule of thirds. And, it's like I get this balance between the square and this. So I think that's going to work out pretty well. Let me go ahead and trim that off. And I want to trim off just a little bit. It's a little bit long, that's okay. Get my glue paper. I don't use magazine images that much anymore. I used to use it a lot more when I first got into mixed media. I know some folks use magazines quite a bit. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. There's a couple things, right now she's on top of everything. And so I want to kind of incorporate her into the piece. So by extending that red line there, and we'll do this one. The nice thing is I can make up something new and different. I don't have to do it exactly the way I had it before, but just that little bit of a line helps push her into the background. Okay. Now, as I look at this is very heavy on this side now because she's got this real dark black top on, some real dark values. I don't have any dark values over here except for a few little kind of thin lines on the maps. So I want to have some darker values on the opposite side. So I'm going to bring in some lines. I'm just kind of thinking what kind of lines I want. So I got the black pen. And I'm thinking just some straight lines just to go back to that, but I don't know. Actually, you know what? I do know what I want to do. I'm going to use something that I've done quite a bit. It's not really a pattern. It's just kind of a series of lines, thick and thin, and I connect them. And it all came from doodling. And so it's something that I've used quite a bit over the years. And it's really about connection. So how these kind of different lines and shapes connect. So the nice thing is that I can use straight lines, which tie in with the straight lines of the squares and rectangles and the edges of the paper, but then I can also throw in some curved lines. And I really haven't used these kind of curved lines. They're a little bit more of a geometric curve, not kind of wiggly squiggly like the red lines. And then the nice thing is I can also do circles. Okay, so, that starts to help balance, but with this being the only thing, this is so different that like when I look at it, I'm kind of drawn up to here. My eyes are kind of drawn up here. So I need to sort of sneak in some of this type of imagery elsewhere. I'm not too worried if they're not colored in totally solid. It just kind of helps balance out. I'm going to do one more over here. Okay, so that helps balance it out. I don't know. I could probably continue and maybe connect all that, but I don't know. I just those three little bits kind of help balance out. They kind of balance out with the black down here. Let's see, maybe grab a slightly thinner pen. Let's go ahead and trim this off now. Close up my glue stick and just kind of look at it. I think I'm going to call this one done for today. Go ahead and sign it. Now down here, I'm like, oh, where do I sign it? So, you know what? Let me turn it this way and I'll sign it on this side. All right, that's going to do it for another Mixed Media Monday. I think sometimes we wonder, like, kind of how do artists come up with their ideas? You know, do they imagine it and then kind of bring it to fruition? Do they just kind of make it up as they go? You know, oftentimes I am just making it up as I'm going. Other times it's kind of looking at what I have, you know. So I didn't envision this. I didn't have this image in mind. It's not like I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to make this thing. What I did was I looked through some of the collage materials that I had and I said, oh, I'll use a map. Oh, I'll use this photograph. And then that started getting me thinking, like, okay, I'm going to, you know, maybe go back to some of the things that I use a lot of. And so that kind of dictated my color choices, but still it it's not like I sat down and had this idea completely formed in my head. It was just sort of like, oh, this, I'm going to use this, that, oh, I like that, I'm going to grab that and incorporate that in. So it was sort of like, well, I had a starting point. I didn't have it all planned out. Some artists do really plan things out. But I love the fact with these little pieces, and I've said it time and time again, that you can really just play around, experiment, explore, and then you could take those ideas. If you want to make something bigger, more involved, more planned out, then you have this kind of wealth of experiences working with these ideas. And then you can kind of bring that forward into other work. So anyway, I'm glad that you were able to tune in for another Mixed Media Monday. Really appreciate you being here. And remember, if you have any questions or comments, please pop them into the comments and I'll try to respond to them. If you'd like to see something in particular, let me know. If you have any suggestions for me, let me know. And remember, if you really like this, share it, let people know. You know, like and subscribe as always, but yeah, share it, let people know about this, and say, hey, have you caught this guy doing these little pieces of mixed media work? So anyway, appreciate you being here. Appreciate you taking the time and spending it with me as I make some stuff. And as always, happy creating.